There are a lot of Tier 10 tech tree vehicles available on a World of Tanks Blitz. A lot of people will pick a Tier 10 to grind for. Let's say the STB1. It's a fantastic medium. It's got a lot of strengths going for it. But what a lot of players don't think about is grinding up to the STB1, which can be one of the most painful experiences, especially for a newer player to witness in the game. So, in today's video, I thought I would break into every single tech tree line in the game, talking about the grind itself, if it's good, if it's bad, and really how you should tackle grinding the lines. Now, I'm not going to try and have this video be 20 years long, so I'm going to try and slim down really the grinding and just talk about if it's a good line for a beginner, is good for experienced players, what the real highlights of the tanks are on the line, and really how you should tackle grinding it. So, with that aside, we're just going to start off with America, make our way down through the rest of the countries. So, the American tree. We're going to start off with the T110E4. You're going to branch off from the Wolverine, and you make your way to the Hellcat. Now, the Hellcat's great. It's got super good DPM, super good mobility. The only thing you're going to have to be worried about is smashers, SU-152s, KV-2s, anything with high alpha and decent HE pen is going to cut right through your tank. Even if you're angling it, the Hellcat has like 15 mils of frontal armor, so it's a great tank, but it definitely can be a bit tricky to work. Then you move on to the T-25-2, which is just kind of a Hellcat with a bit more armor and a nicer gun. So it's a great tank, plays a lot like the Hellcat, just a little bit slower, but overall, a very solid tank. The T-28 prototype is the first vehicle you're going to get snagged on. The T-28 prototype stock has one of the worst stock engines in the game, a power to weight of 7.3. This makes it one of the most immobile tanks, and when you also take away the tracks, wow, this tank is going to be incredibly painful to drive stock. As well, if you don't grind the T25AT, you're also not going to have the secondary gun unlocked on the vehicle, so you're only going to have this gun. So, in other words, grinding the T28 prototype stock is one of the most foolish decisions you can make in the game. My suggestion would be grinding the T25AT first, which is going to give you the Hellcat gun to start off with, and then make your way to this gun, which is then going to be unlocked on your T28 prototype to begin with at the second stage, meaning that you're not going to have as painful of a grind. If you don't want to do that, and let's say you really want to get the E4, then I would just suggest you have a boatload of free XP saved up from whatever you've been doing with premiums or whatever, and use all that XP to make your way to the top gun, the top engine, and the tracks, because wow, this will be a very, very painful stock grind if you don't. Now, when you get the T28 prototype fully upgraded, it's actually not too bad. It's got a really nice gun, especially on DPM. It's got okay accuracy. Overall, it's a nice tank, but it definitely takes a lot of painful grinding to get it to its fully equipped state. Then you move on to the T30, which is just amazing. 640 damage per shot. Even the stock gun on the vehicle is pretty good. It's the same as the T34 gun. So it's good. It'll get the job done. Not bad at all, even stock grinding, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. You don't have to get a fully upgraded turret on the T30. It comes with it equipped. And then you get to the E4, which is not too bad either. The E4 is a great tank. I wouldn't say it's a good beginner tank, and the whole line itself is not for beginners. As I said, I would much rather suggest you go for the T25AT down to the E3 before you get the E4. I would say the E4 is an intermediate level. If you're a decent player, then go for the E4. But if you're a beginner, definitely not the kind of line you want to start off with. When we move on to the E3 line, you're going to make your way starting off with the Jackson, which is just a more armored Hellcat, really. The gun's still really solid, a bit less DPM, bit less dispersion, but it's got a really nice gun, really good penetration, DPM, everything's still pretty solid, and mobility-wise, the tank isn't too bad at all. As I said, the T25AT is not bad either. It's actually very, very well armored, which is great. It means that if you're using the gun depression, which I think it carries 10 of, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, 10 degrees, its armor is actually quite impressively thick. And even the stock gun on the vehicle has 2,400 DPM, which is not bad at all. Its premium pen is plenty to cut through any tier 8 you'll fight. And once you get the secondary gun on the tank, then your standard pen goes to 208 and 258, and then when you get the top gun, it's actually just about the same, as you can see. So really, when it comes to the gun on this vehicle, it's the secondary gun that's kind of a better option. The only real difference is that the top gun has more alpha at 310, which is the main advantage. But you need to get that top gun if you do want to grind for, obviously, the T28 prototype. If you don't, oh boy, is that going to be painful. Now, the T28 is the exact same situation that the prototype has. If you're grinding this tank without the top engine, it is going to be very painful. So make sure you have just enough free XP in reserve from grinding the tier 7 to get this engine upgraded. Also make sure you can get the tracks because it's going to be really slow. But once you get the engine and the tracks, it's not going to be too bad. You're going to get the gun. The tier 10 gun, by the way, is fantastic. T95 gets to get that gun right from the beginning, and once you get the top gun, it's also a fantastic vehicle. Once again, make sure you get this top engine. You will have this engine equipped from the tier 8, but man, do you want to get that top engine on the T95, so do keep that in mind. The T110E3 is a fantastic tank. It's even pretty solid for beginners, if I'm going to be completely honest. The problem is that, well, the T28 and T95 are not very beginner-friendly tanks. They are very slow, and they require a lot of thoughtful ideas when it comes to positioning, which is something you're going to want to keep in mind. Overall, I think the line is maybe a 5 out of 10 on difficulty. It's not super hard, especially after the T28 and T25 AT were buffed. T95 got a mobility buff. It used to go 14 back in the day. So the whole line is a lot more beginner-friendly, but personally, I wouldn't suggest to go for the E3 or E4 if you're newer to the game. I'd say, though, if you understand positioning and you understand the game in general, the E3 and E4 are both fantastic tanks. Now we move on to one of the best lines in the game for really any skill level, the T110E5. Starting off, the T1 Heavy is overpowered. Its armor is insane for a tier 5 vehicle. The majority of tier 4s and even tier 5s cannot pen it frontally, which is pretty insane. The M6 as well is really solid. Its side armor used to be very weak, but then Wargaming buffed it to be about 93mm on the side, which means the majority of HE shells are not going to pen you really ever. So the M6 is great. Add that on to the fact that the top gun's got decent okay DPM at like 1600, but pretty good pen. 170 and 255 is plenty for even some of the strongest on the armament of tier 7s. And the T29 is the best tier 7 tech tree. Like, it really is just an amazing vehicle. Even the stock turret has the same armor, only one less on the rear. And by the way, the stock gun on the tank is great. I mean, sure, its penetration is a little bit lacking for tier 8s, but still, the fact that it's got great DPM, pretty good dispersion, I mean, everything about the stock gun is pretty dang impressive. Overall, the T29, even with a stock grind, is really good. Just try to get the top engine. It's not the most important. You can see it's only about a 93 horsepower difference, but the top engine on the T29 will also bleed into the top engine on the T32, which is more why I would say just to get the top engine when grinding the T29. Now, the T32 used to have the same gun as the T29, with 208 standard pen and 257 on the premium, which was pretty poor for fighting tier 9s. However, Wargaming buffed the gun, so now it's got 229 on the standard and 278 on the premium, which is a lot better. It makes the T32 really solid for fighting heavily armored opponents, which it used to not be great at. It's got terrible dispersion. 0.376 is awful, but nice thing is that it actually has okay DPM at 2000. It's got pretty good gun depression at 10 degrees, and its turret is insane. It's 298mm thick frontally, and I would say that this turret is stronger than the majority of tier 9 turrets. I mean, frontally, you're never going to pen it hull down. It's really solid. So the T32 is a fantastic tier 8 tech tree. The M103 is also fantastic. It kind of gets a bad reputation, but I personally think it's great. First of all, the top engine doesn't really have that much horsepower, only 33 more than the stock engine, so it doesn't matter if you get the engine right off the bat. What does matter is that you get this top gun. The secondary gun is not bad. As you can see, it's still got fantastic heat pen at 374. The only real disadvantage is that it's got a bit worse DPM, bit worse dispersion, but overall, I mean, the tier 9 gun is still really good on this tank, and it'll get the job done easily. So all you gotta do is make sure you have enough free XP, grinding the T32 to get this gun. The stock turret, yeah, it's gonna be painful. You definitely want to get that top turret on the vehicle. But even then, it's still really good just to get this gun, and then get the top turret, and then slowly grind your way to the top gun. Once you reach the T110E5, this vehicle is just fantastic in really every way. The T110E5 is fast at 42, its DPM is on the lower side at 2400, but its dispersion is insane, its aiming time is amazing, it's got ridiculous pen, and its armor is really solid after it's been buffed over the years. So I really like the E5, and I would definitely say for a beginner level, I would say the E5 is a fantastic beginner tank. As long as you understand how to work ridge lines and use gun depression, which is a pretty easy thing to understand, just hide your hull, you'll do fine. E5 is a great line, and I would definitely say it's great for really any skill level. It's even being used in comp now, so fantastic tank. Then we move on to an even better tank line, in my opinion, the M6-Yoh. Now, I would not say the M6-Yoh is a beginner-friendly tank. Even though it is somewhat easy to understand how to play, it still has a couple snags and hitches here and there that is going to make it a bit more challenging than the E5. First of all, the whole line is a very weird way of armor. It's not like the E5 where it's very simple, hull down, most armor is going to get you through it. The Yoh line has a lot of weak spots, a lot of, weird things here and there that is going to make it a lot weaker for dealing with enemies. The first tank you start off with on this line, after grinding through the M6, is the M7-Yoh, a vehicle I absolutely hated. I didn't even drive it stock, and look at that, 280 horsepower less. I would suggest if you start down this line to just completely free XP the engine all the way to the top one, because if you don't, your power to weight is going to be 13.2. Oof. As well, the gun, well, it's actually fine. The stock gun on this tank will get the job done. Even though your DPM, your pen, everything is worse, it's fine. I mean, you're going to struggle to penetrate higher armored tanks in tier 8, but once you do get that top gun, it is exactly the same as the T29, so at least it has that going for it. The problem I have with the M7-Yoh is that its armor is not good. I mean, compared to the T29, it's just flat worse. It's not an awful tank, but I really did not like playing it, and I can guarantee grinding this tank stock is going to be a whole different hell than what I experienced playing this tank fully upgraded with 100% crew. The M3-Yoh is the tier 8. Now, the M3-Yoh is fantastic. I absolutely loved this vehicle. It's got a decent top speed of 35. Its power to weight is okay at 16, but it's not a very mobile tank. The main thing this tank has going for it is the top gun. You're going to start off with the stock gun, which is the same one as the M7-Yoh. I would highly suggest have enough free XP saved up playing the tier 7 to get this top gun, because it is a huge difference. Sure, DPM not too different, but this top gun carries a 3-shell autoloader, dealing 930 damage in a clip. It's got fantastic pen on the standard, 236. The premium's 280. Overall, the line is great. Its dispersion is fantastic on this tier 8. Everything's really good. I would focus more on getting this top gun than even getting the turret. I really would say it's that important to get that gun. Once you have the gun, then I would go for the engine, then I'd go for the turret. Everything else comes after. But mainly, I would suggest to go for that gun. Apart from that, the tank's great. It's got fantastic gun depression at 8 degrees. It's mobile. It's got a great level of DPM penetration. Everything about the M3-Yoh is good, even for a beginner, I'd say. It's the M5-Yoh you get to that is a lot trickier for a beginner. Now, the M5-Yoh has two different gun options. You start off with the stock gun, and this gun's actually okay. It's got 330 heat pen, which is plenty. Its armor piercing's 223, a bit on the lower side, but at least you have plenty of heat pen. Even for a stock gun, that's plenty. It's got a 3-shell gun with 300 damage per shot. Honestly, the stock gun on this tank is pretty good. I wouldn't say it's amazing, but it's very good for a stock fully unupgraded gun. So when you get to the M5-Yoh, I wouldn't worry about the gun immediately. I would more worry about getting the engine, because that is 220 horsepower, and as well I would worry about getting the tracks. Once you've got that equipped, just go for the guns, because there's no turret upgrade. It's a great tank to grind, especially because you don't have that many upgrades to worry about. Now, personally, I like the 2-shot gun, but I would definitely say that the triple shotgun is a lot better. 2,400 DPM, great dispersion, fantastic aiming time, even a really good pen, 352 on the heat, and 265 on the standard. It's a great gun. I mean, everything about the M5-Yoh is really solid. It's just the armor profile is a bit poor for a newer player. I should also point out that this vehicle has an emergency track, which allows it to reverse at 4 kilometers per hour, even if the main track, as you can see, is destroyed. Finally, you make your way to the M6-Yoh. The M6-Yoh is a very good tank. I would actually be willing to say that this is probably the best tier 10 American heavy, and just one of the best tier 10s, period. I'd rate this as a top 5. Why? Well, it's got 2 gun options. It's got a single triple shotgun, which is the stock gun. The stock gun's actually better for a lot of situations. 3000 DPM, 0.317 dispersion. It's got great intraclip reload at 2.5 seconds, fantastic pen. It's got really everything, even 10 degrees of gun depression. And once you get the double shotgun unlocked, it's even better. It's got 2500 DPM, but the main advantage is that it's got 450 damage a shot with a 1.71 second intraclip, which is absolutely insane. So I really like the M-VI-Yoh. It's a fantastic vehicle, and even though it definitely has its fair share of downsides, it's got weak armor. I mean, you can see it's got these big ol' hatches on the roof, and both of those hatches are a weak spot. By the way, they are a bit troll. You'll notice how they're placed at different positions, kind of like a misshapen boob. So because of that, when you're actually aiming at the tank like this, it's a bit trickier than you think to hit the hatches sometimes, because it looks like they're at the same distance from each other, but they're actually not, so do keep that in mind. But the M-VI-Yoh's armor is definitely not the strong suit. It's the fact that it's just got such a good gun. It's got a lot of hit points and that reserve tracking mechanic. Overall, it's an amazing tank. Next up, we move to the M48 Patton line. Now, the M48 Patton line, I would say, is very good for a beginner, but only if you have, well, some experience when grinding the tier 9 and 8 and 7. And that's really the problem. The M48 Patton itself is great for a beginner. It's got decent DPM, decent dispersion, great on movement dispersion. It's got good gun depression. It's got really everything you'd want for a beginner vehicle. The problem is the M46 Patton and the Pershing. Those are two very bad tanks for any player that is new to the game. Personally, I think the M46 Patton is one of the worst tanks for a newer player. So that is the real problem with the M48 Patton, and why I would suggest to stay away from it if you're a newer player in the game. You're going to start off at the M4 Easy 8, which is a pretty decent tank. There's not much special about it. 12 degrees of gun depression, decent DPM, 160 alpha. It's a tank. You won't enjoy it that much, but you'll get through it feeling like, okay, it wasn't terrible. Then you move on to the T20. Now, the T20 is outdated, but it's got a really nice gun. It's got 225 damage a shot, 160 standard pen, which is poor, but the premium pen at 243 is really good. This is essentially a Hellcat gun on a tier 7 medium, which allows it to hit really hard, have good DPM, decent dispersion. Overall, pretty solid gun. Mobility-wise, too, the tank's fast, 56 kilometers per hour, 20 in reverse, and an average speed of 40. I mean, it's a mobile tank. It's got a good gun. The problem is that its armor is atrocious. I mean, its armor is butter for even tier 6s to aim at, which is why it starts off not great for beginners. Then you make your way to the Pershing. Now, the Pershing, after getting buffed and buffed and buffed, is great. It's got 180 damage, or penetration. It's got 268 on the premium, which is insane. When you add that onto the fact that this vehicle has 2,700 damage per minute, making this the highest for a tier 8 medium tank in the game, it's great. I mean, for an experienced player that understands how to use this DPM effectively, the tank is amazing. It's very underrated, and I mean, it can definitely get the job done. 10 degrees of gun depression, decent turret armor. It's a great tank. It's even got good dispersion, aiming time. Everything about the Pershing is great. It's just that for a newer player, this is not a very threatening tank, and a lot of players like myself will just eat you up for breakfast. So yeah, that's really the thing about the Pershing. If you understand how to work it well, it'll be amazing. But if you don't, yeah, not the case. And that's even more the case for the M46 Patton. Actually, in the next update, by the time you're watching this video, possibly it already have happened, but this tank is getting a massive DPM buff. It'll probably be about 3,000 damage per minute when it gets that buff, which is a lot. The M46 Patton features a really good gun when it comes to DPM, dispersion, alpha as well, 350. The problem is the pen, 278 on the premium. Yeah, that's not great. That means if you're aiming at an E100, Jagdpanzer, really anything that has decent armor, good luck. That's all I'm going to say. You're not going to pen them. You're going to have to look for their weak spots, their lower plates, some little, hatches or something like that if you're aiming at them frontally. So that's really the problem with the Patton. It's the same problem with the E50 Av. It's just pen. It does not have a lot of pen, which for a newer player is terrible. As well, the turret armor is pretty bad. 122 mils on the turret. Essentially, if you're aiming at this thing's turret, as long as you don't hit that little mantlet, you're going to go through every single time. The hull is basically the same as the Pershing, and I think that's the major problem with the M46 Patton. It's just the armor's not great. It's going to fall apart so fast if you're a newer player, and that's why I would not suggest to go for the Patton as a newer player. But once you get for the M48 Patton, as I said earlier, this tank's great. It's got good mobility, 48 kilometers per hour, a bit slower for a medium, but it's got a good power to weight to keep it up with the rest of them toe-to-toe and actually acceleration. It's got a great gun, 3,300 DPM, and that's even with Cali, 0.317 dispersion, 3 seconds aiming time, 350 damage per shot, 440 on the HE, which is very nice, I should point out, 8 degrees of gun depression. The tank has a great, I mean, everything is great. There's no downside of the Patton. I mean, even its armor is really solid. Because of the way its armor is shaped, you can see it's got a rounded hull, which means if you angle it like this and some of the shells go wonky, they'll bounce off the upper plate, off the lower plate. The turret's got really solid turret armor. The side armor is boat-shaped, as you can see. It's kind of rounded on the bottom like a canoe, which means if you hit some weird angles on the bottom, it'll bounce. The M48 Patton is just a really good all-round tank. And that is why, statistically, it is the #1 performer for mediums on average win rates. It's a really good vehicle. I really like it. Definitely has some downsides here and there, but I think it's a great tank. Now we move on to the T57 Heavy. Now, the T57 Heavy is, once again, another line I would not suggest to go for as a beginner, for one very simple reason. It's a tank that you need to understand how to work the clip, how to work the armor, and its playstyle very early on. The 57 Heavy is a tank that has been buffed and buffed and buffed and buffed and buffed over the years. And I still stand by that. I don't think the tank should have been buffed like 3 years ago. I made a video saying that the 57 Heavy should not be buffed, and Wargaming just keeps giving it more and more and more. They buffed its armor, they buffed its DPM, then they gave it shell interclip boost. I don't know why. It was amazing when it was first in the game, and then they just kept buffing it. And the very simple reason why is because a lot of newer players see this tank, they're like, oh, it's American, it's got a clip, and it's deadly with DPM and armor. Well, that's the problem. People think they can just YOLO with this vehicle, but you can't. The 57 Heavy does not have good armor. It's troll, don't get me wrong, it can definitely get bounces, but its armor is not effective enough to be reliable. And any player like myself, or any decent player, will absolutely eat into a T57 Heavy player that tries to use its armor, or YOLO. And that's what a lot of 57 Heavy players do, is they just think, oh, I'm unstoppable, I got this insane gun, they YOLO and die. So, because of that, I would not suggest to grind the tank as a beginner. Now, if you're experienced, this is by far one of the best damage farming lines in the game. I mean, if you're on the EU server and you're close to my skill level, or, you know, anywhere 60%-ish, you could probably go 3,000 average damage, close to 4,000. I mean, this is just a tank that absolutely farms damage. But before we break into the 57, let's talk about the tanks before it. Now, there's 2 different ways to grind to the 57. There is the main way Wargaming wants you to, which is the T37 to the T71 to the T69 to the 5041. But you can also branch off from the T49 to the 5041. Personally, I wouldn't suggest to, well, honestly, I like the T69, but what I would suggest to do is to go this way, from the Chaffee to the Bulldog to the 49, for a very simple reason. And that is because the 49 can research 2 tanks. It can go for the 5041 and 92E1. Or, if you just grind the T69, you're grinding 1 tank. So, it's just called smart. If you grind the 49, not only is it one of the most fun tanks in the game, but you get 2 lines knocked out for the price of 1. If you grind the T69, you only get 1 line. Yeah, it's not much of a win there. Now, if you do decide to get the T69 and the 71, I actually think they're amazing tanks. The T37, there's nothing really special about it. It's kind of like a worse AMX in my opinion, but T71 is amazing. I love this little tank. It's got great DPM for an autoloader, 2,200, fantastic dispersion at 0.308, and an aiming time of 3 seconds. That's all really good. It's got a 1.5 second interclip, and it's got 160 damage. So that means it can deal 480 damage in a matter of, what, 3 seconds? I mean, that's really nasty. Add that into the fact that this tank is incredibly mobile, going at a top speed of 64 with a power weight of 30. I mean, it's just so fun, and it's got good gun depression, even though it doesn't look like it. This thing has 7 degrees. The T69 is tiny, it's super mobile, it's got a really deadly gun, and it's really fun to play. It's by far one of my favorite tier 7s. It's not good for a beginner at all, but it's still super duper fun. Then you make your way to the T69. Now the T69 is actually also fantastic. It's got 2,300 DPM, 0.326 dispersion, and 2.4 seconds of aiming time. All really good values. Add that into the fact that it might not have the most standard pen at 190, but 275 heat pen is amazing. And when you add that into the fact that this is an autoloader with a 2.5 second intro clip, 225 damage a shot, that means you can deal, what, 675 damage in 5 seconds in a medium? That's impressive as heck. Plus, the tank's decently fast, 52 with a power to weight of 17.5. The T69 is one of those vehicles that is incredibly underrated. It's a tank that can very easily get super big carries, even though you would not expect it to be very good. And then you move on to a very similar tank, just a tier higher, the T54E1. This is a tank I do not like. It's decent, don't get me wrong. It's got a good gun, 2,800 DPM. It's got 310 alpha and a 2.5 second intro clip. That means you can deal 930 damage in 5 seconds. The Bat Chat wishes it could do that, but problem I have, well, first of all, it has no HE. It's very weird to only have AP and APCR. That's the first weird thing. As well, it doesn't have a lot of APCR pen, only at 284. Add that into the fact that the T54E1 has no armor, and it's got one of the worst camo values for a medium. I mean, you look at this thing, and you think, gosh, that thing's just a heavy. And you think it is. I mean, it's huge. And sometimes bigger is better, but not when it comes to the 54E1. Sorry, I had a bit of a cough in my throat there. But yeah, really, the 54E1 is not a great tank for a beginner. Neither is the T69, neither is the T71 or the 57 Heavy. The whole line is really solid, but you have to be very skilled to take advantage of it. If you're not, then I would just not suggest to go near that line. The final line we have is the Sheridan. Now, this line, I would say, is great for any skill level. I would say if you're a beginner or an experienced player, the Sheridan is amazing. Now, if you're a beginner and you want to grind for the Sheridan, you do got to keep in mind that this is a light tank, which means you have to understand how camouflage works with a light tank, where positioning is, and as almost importantly, when to trade with opponents and when not to. That is the main things with the Sheridan. I would say out of difficulty, it's a 3 out of 10. It's pretty easy to understand. I mean, as long as you know how to use the Sheridan, very easily poke somebody, either out trade or just use your camo, outspot them with the most view range in the game. It's a great tank, but it definitely has some downsides here and there. So, you start off with the Chaffee. Really boring tank, to be honest. Yeah, I wouldn't really care too much about it. You'll just get past it. You get to the M41 Bulldog. M41 Bulldog is really good, and it's got 2 gun options. Now, I would not suggest to run the autoloader, and that's great because it's a waste of everything, honestly. Don't waste your XP on the autoloader. Just go straight down these gun options, right to the top gun, which has almost 2,600 DPM, which is really good. 0.308 dispersion. It's only got a 3.62 second reload for 160 damage per shot. I mean, it's not the M41D with like 2,800 DPM, but it's still pretty dang good. Also, this vehicle has 10 degrees of gun depression, a power to weight of 28, and a top speed of 72. Really dang good. The T49 also has some pretty good upgrades. Now, the stock gun on the 49, it's not actually bad. I mean, a lot of people think it's bad. This here is the gun that sometimes you'll see weirdos running. It's got 275 pen on the heat, which is really good. It's got 2,300 DPM. I mean, it's basically the same as this gun. We can see they're almost identical, just a bit worse dispersion. Honestly, grinding the 49 stock is not terrible because of the fact that the stock gun on the vehicle is still okay, actually. I mean, it's got plenty of pen, which is pretty impressive for a light tank. Once you've gotten the top modules on the T49, that is when you can get this gun, the big ol' 152mm XM81. This gun has less DPM, less pen, less everything, but it does deal 560 damage a shot, 780 on the HE. As long as you understand how to work your rounds with this tank, it is amazing, and even if you're a beginner, who cares? It's just a super fun vehicle. It's fast, it's got really everything you'd need. Now, as I said, you can branch off from the T49 to the 54E1. I personally would suggest to go this way, but you can as well make it to the tank we're going to be talking about, the T92E1. Now, the stock gun on the T92E1 is actually really good. It's got 2,600 DPM, 300 mils of heat pen, 0.326 dispersion. I mean, this is a light tank with a better gun than the majority of mediums we've just gone over for a tier 9 stock gun. So even when you're grinding this tank stock, don't worry, the gun's amazing. I'd start off with getting the engine, which is actually really important. I'd start off with getting the tracks. Get these two, then make your way to the gun. And by the way, the top gun on this vehicle is ridiculously good. 220 penetration on the standard, but it's the heat at 340, making this the highest heat pen for a tier 9 medium and light in the game. It's got 10 degrees of gun depression, 560 alpha, 680 on the HE. Even though the DPM's bad, it's still a really impressive gun. And then finally, we end off with the Sheridan, which is just kind of a better version of the 92E1. You got more DPM sitting at 2,474, you got a bit more mobility, and you are also completely covered in spaced armor, which means that if you're trying to shoot at this tank, you have to squeeze it in between these little creases on the back. It's just really a fantastic tank. I would say the Sheridan, as I said, is a really good tank for a beginner or an experienced player. Now, I was planning on making this video on every single tech tree line, Germany, Russia, but I've just realized that it took me 30 minutes just to cut through America alone. And Russia and Germany have even more tanks. So, for now, I think I'm going to end off the video with 30 minutes. And then what I'll do is, if you want to see more like this on other lines, the grinds and everything involved, let me know. And I'll break into the German tree, and the Russian tree, and the British tree, and every other tree in the game. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.